So let's get started. So tonight we're going to talk about how the birds show the glory of God. And I'm going to start off with a series of slides that talk first about the Bible, and then it talks about what your kids or grandkids or your nephews and nieces are being taught in school. So as always, our mission statement is we are here to exalt Jesus Christ and worship Him. We want to teach the Bible. Everything that we are teaching is out of the Bible, literal translation of the Bible. We want to equip you as the saints to go out and interact with the world, and then have you go and make disciples of the world by bringing them to Jesus. So Jim isn't here tonight. I talked to him and he says, "I'm sorry, I know I missed your talk. I heard it was for the birds." So thank you. He's here in spirit. So the overview of the talk is, first we're going to talk about what the Scripture says about birds. The next segment will be bird evolution, what's being taught in schools, public schools. The next part is evolutionary hoaxes. As usual with many of these evolutionary fossil finds and everything, there's hoaxes, and I'll explain why they are happening. The unique features and capabilities and actions of birds absolutely show God's glory, and have multiple reasons why birds are an example of creation and not evolution. So 1 Corinthians 15, it says, "All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one flesh for men, another flesh for beasts, another flesh for birds, and another flesh for fish." So that's human skin. That's the flesh of man. That's the flesh of beast. That's the flesh of birds, where the feathers go in, and that's the flesh of fish. So there's absolute, you see the truth in the Bible, even in the simplest statement about the flesh of different animals. So as Jesus said, if I told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? John 3:12. So we know from the creation narrative in Genesis 1 that the birds and the sea creatures were created on day 5. God called it very good. And throughout the Bible, both the New Testament and the Old Testament, there are a number of references to birds. I think I have a slide that says there's over 300 references to birds. And this one is something that we're probably all familiar with, talking about how God looks out for the birds. "Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they?" So how God takes care of the birds. And God blessed each kind of bird. We'll see the diversity within birds. If you look at, mammals, you have quite a bit of diversity. You have dogs, cats, elephants, different mammals. But when you look at birds and you just look at their appearance, they're striking creatures. And there's more than 300 references in the Bible that relates to the glory of God's birds. There's a few of them. This is Job, where God is asking Job how smart he is, basically. "How does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread his wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? On the rocks it dwells and resides, on the crags of the rocks and the stronghold. From there he spies out prey. His eyes observe from afar. Its young ones suck up blood, and where is the slain? There it is." So you got the hawks, the ravens, feeds the ravens, the sparrows. "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will?" Talks about the ownership of the birds. "For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on the 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine." So just like everything else in the universe, The birds, along with all of the other animals and ourselves, belong to God. So I searched around. I found a couple of things on PBS. I have a confession to make. We're not hooked up to the sound system. I'm going to see how good Junior here is, the little computer, if it's stable. So hopefully you can hear this. This first one is, the theory is, just so you don't get blindsided by it, the conventional theory that we have being taught in our schools is that birds evolved from dinosaurs. So they say that theropod dinosaurs, meaning the four-limbed dinosaurs, over vast periods of time, transformed themselves into feathered birds. So that's the thesis, and I'm going to play a couple of little video clips here.
It's the power trying to come back on. Not as scary, but scientifically speaking, it makes sense. The Jurassic Park movies are built around a dream. Using science, humans could one day walk among the giant reptiles that used to rule the Earth. Spoiler alert, we already do. Thanks to science, we know our planet is home to 10,000 or so species of living dinosaurs. We just call them birds. How do we know this is true? Well, let's leave the nest and bring Bird's place on the Tree of Life into view. Everything on Earth with this sort of four-limbed, belly in the front, spine in the back, head on top arrangement is a tetrapod. Now last year we did a whole series on why tetrapod bodies are shaped this way, so check that out here or down in the description. Now, starting with a common ancestor of all tetrapods, amphibians branched off first, then us mammals, followed by turtles, lizards, and snakes, and then the group we call archosaurs, which contains crocodilians, pterosaurs, and finally dinosaurs. Birds are in here. Zoom in on the dinosaurs and we start to see some familiar faces from John Hammond's Island. Now there's a lot there, but the important part is that the birds we know today didn't branch off until way up here. I don't know about you, but when I look at a cassowary, I don't need any convincing that birds are dinosaurs. But let's assemble the evidence anyway. When most of us think of the dinosaurs, we think of bones. By comparing the skeletons of things that are very dinosaurish to things that are very birdish to the sort of dino-birdish things in between, well, you're about to look at chickens in a very different way. The most famous dino bird is our friend Archaeopteryx. Its fossils give us a look at the transition between scaly reptiles and birdy birds, because they share features from both. Like birds, its forelimbs were enlarged like wings, its pubic bone pointed towards its tail, along with one of its toes, and it had fused clavicles. That's right, just like your Thanksgiving turkey, dinos from T-Rex to Archaeopteryx had wishbones. Now, in the reptile column, these dino birds had long tails, ribs around their belly, claws on their fingers, and teeth. I'm so glad birds don't have teeth anymore. Nightmare fuel. Dinosaurs became pretty front-heavy as their forelimbs got bigger, and later as they lost their tails. So in order not to topple over, they adopted a sort of crouching posture. We see it in birds from sparrows to ostriches today. In one of the most hilarious experiments ever recorded, scientists attached prosthetic tails to chickens, and sure enough, with the added weight and back, they adopted a more dino-like walk. We think that how birds move their wings during flight even matches how velociraptors and their relatives would snap their forelimbs out to grab prey. But don't worry, despite what the movies say, they were only about knee-high. Oh, and those clever girls should have been covered in feathers. Scientists have unearthed dozens of fossils showing evidence of feathered dinosaurs, but for some reason, Jurassic Park and other dino movies have a strict no plumage policy. Feather forms range from simple quills with just a few branches, like what we see on baby birds, to full-fledged fabulous feathers. Now, some fossil feathers even tell us what color they might have been. Oh, so fluffy. We're not quite sure when birds took to the air, but extinct dinosaurs were too heavy to have used feathers for flight. They probably served other colorful purposes instead. Birds today are tetrachromats, meaning they have 4 color receptors compared to our 3. Many of them can see down in the ultraviolet range, which means they see colored plumage like these beautiful painted buntings in ways we can't even imagine. And today, birds use that exotic plumage and their ultravision to put on some pretty amazing mating rituals. Extinct dinosaurs definitely had feathers, and they probably shared this tetrachromacy, so what's to say that we wouldn't find similar shows at Jurassic Park? In a previous video, I talked about how the T-Rex roar in Jurassic Park was made from a mixture of a baby elephant, a tiger, and an alligator. But what did dinosaurs really sound like? Well, birds today create their symphonies using an organ called a syrinx, and their brains have evolved specially to create and decode those complex songs. Unfortunately, dinosaurs lacked both of these adaptations. So while we couldn't teach a dinosaur to talk like a parrot, it's likely that they made some interesting noises. The large hollow crest of Parasaurolophus could have been used as a sort of resonator. Scientists from Sandia Labs reconstructed what that might have sounded like. Why did birds survive as the rest of their reptilian cousins drifted off into the great fossil pit in the sky? Why don't we have T-Rex-sized parrots? After the meteor strike in the Yucatan, plants became more scarce, and without enough food, big-bodied herbivores went extinct, along with the large carnivores that ate them. But smaller meat-eating dinosaurs, the same lineages that led to birds, were able to survive with smaller bodies and on less food.
Life, finds a way.
From fossil to feather, it's clear that birds make their nest in the tree of life right next to creatures that haven't walked the earth for 65 million years. They aren't relatives of dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs.
So that's basically what the kids are being taught. So you start over here with a T-Rex, and then this is kind of a joke. You evolve to something that is a Tyrannosaurus clux, and then you have a Clux deluxe, and then you have a Rex filet, sort of like Chick-fil-A, Gallus decontis, and finally you get to Tom's Chicken. But if you look, he was talking about eyesight, four-color eyesight, and he was talking about what sounds they made. The only thing they have is bones. They don't know what the posture is. When you find a pile of bones, you know whether it was upright or walking on 2 legs or 4 legs. You know, you have to surmise that. And the feathers they find is imprints. They're in the rock layers. So they don't have any evidence other than the bones and the size and a bunch of creative either computer graphics people or artists. So one of the things that is amazing there is in the literature, they claim that birds evolved during the Mesozoic period, and with regard to the Archaeopteryx, it was supposed to have evolved about 150,000 years ago. But there was an animal, it was not a bird, it was what they call a pterosaur, and that is a depiction of the pterosaur compared to a giraffe. So this bird, when it was on the ground and standing fully upright, it was as tall, or some bones they found that would be taller than a giraffe. And that thing, they estimated, weighed 450 pounds, and it could fly. So how did they figure out that this 450-pound thing evolved and learned how to fly before they had a 1-pound bird? You know, they're saying this evolved way before the Archaeopteryx, and so how did that evolve? That evolved flight. Bats, we know, can fly. Birds can fly. We know insects can fly, and yet conventional science says that each one of those species developed flight independently. So the ability to fly would have to have evolved 4 different times in unrelated kinds of animals. It's hard to believe. And then this is the depiction of reptiles turning into feathered reptiles, turning into bird-like creatures, and things that finally Archaeopteryx flew, and then we have the bird. And this is probably I've found this same slide in many different books. And the thing that they're pegging their theory on, they are pegging it on the similarity of bone structure between the arms and legs of a dinosaur and the bone structure of the arms and finally the wings of birds. And yet when you look closely at that, and I'll show you a couple of problems that no one ever talks about in the bird evolution business, there are some major problems. And one other thing that I was struck with, in all of these evolutionary scenarios where you're supposed to be moving from a simple creature to a more complex creature as time goes on, they only focus on the similarities. They never focus on the differences. So tonight I'm going to try to make that account more reasonable. I'm going to focus on the differences as we go forward between the reptiles and the birds. So this is just a picture. This is a fossil that people have found. They called it Archaeoraptor. This is the Archaeopteryx bird they're talking about. This is a coelacanth fish they have a fossil of. They said that fish was extinct for 100 million years, and yet they found some in the Indian Ocean. They were fishing and they caught a bunch of these fish, so they had to change their story on that. So this is a hoax that was found or was made apparent in China. And what they found was, I'll go to this slide and then go back to the video. National Geographic paid a lot of money to some paleontologists in China who found a half bird, half lizard. And they called it Archaeoraptor. And they had a big, this is a picture at the bottom, is a picture of the story they had in the National Geographic called Feathers for T-Rex. So this was supposed to have been a very strong evidence for bird, reptile, intermediate species. So what they found out, let me play the video and then I'll give you the rest of the story.
An article published in National Geographic's magazine in 1999 announced the discovery in China of a fossil known as Archaeoraptor. The report contained evolutionist indoctrination along the lines of, in the same way that we can be certain that human beings are mammals, so we may be sure that birds are theropods. Theropods are a kind of dinosaur, and the fossil discovered was depicted as definitive proof of the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs. This species, which was said to have lived around 125 million years ago, was given the name Archaeoraptor leongensis. Fictitious illustrations in the magazine depicted dinosaurs covered in feathers, leaping into the air and then beginning to fly by growing wings. Yet this fossil, announced to the accompaniment of great fanfare by National Geographic, soon turned into a source of terrible embarrassment for the magazine, known for its pro-Darwinist stance. In fact, the fossil did not belong to a species exhibiting both bird and dinosaur characteristics, as National Geographic had claimed. Although the fossil had a beak with teeth and a bird-like body, its tail resembled that of a dinosaur known as the dromaeosaur. The fossil was actually a hoax. It had been deliberately assembled from more than one fossil in such a way as to give the impression of representing a supposed intermediate form and used as evidence for evolution. Evolutionists had learned nothing from the Piltdown Man affair, in which an orangutan and human bones had been assembled together, and this time portrayed a hoax fossil put together from dinosaur and bird bones as proof of evolution.
So the honor of catching the hoax belongs to a Chinese scientist. His name is Dr. Zhu Xing, and he's a famous paleontologist in China. And he examined, because the fossil was from China, he was allowed to examine it. And this lower photo down here is a map of measurements. They took very careful scientific measurements, and they measured what the rocks were that the bones were embedded in. And when he did that, he found that there were over 4 different kinds of rocks. So this isn't like a slab of rock that was accidentally broken into many pieces. It was many pieces of rock that were cut and shaped so that they would all go together. And it had many pieces of it. The tail section was the tail section from the dinosaur. The legs they had from a different dinosaur. And then the body and the beak of the bird was from a bird. So it was like a jigsaw puzzle that they put together. So why would they do that? And the answer with many of these things is money. So if you go out and dig up a chicken bone that's been in the ground for 100 years, and you take it to a museum and say, I found a 100-year-old chicken, would you like to buy it? And they'll tell you, no, get out of here, we're going to call security. If you go in there and you say, I found the bones of a 150 million year old half bird, half reptile, are they going to buy it? They're going to whip out their checkbook and say, how much? So basically there's a lot of these fossils from people who are maybe impoverished, or they're digging and they find things. So by assembling these fossils, a lot of them, and Archaeoraptor has been identified as being that, and it's been admitted by the people at National Geographic as a hoax. But it still appears in these chains of drawings that people have going from reptiles, dinosaurs, to birds. Now, Archaeopteryx is different. This is a fossil that was found in Germany. And we went to the Creation Museum, and we heard a lecture by Dr. David Menton. And he was teaching about something else that day, but he has a great video that's online about the Archaeopteryx. And he has identified, he's a physician, a medical doctor. He's worked at Johns Hopkins and many different facilities. And he identifies it as a true bird. It had feathers, it had teeth, and I'll show you some birds that actually do have teeth. And he said it's basically a bird that they've tried to make into a dinosaur. And it's Dr. Alan Fiducia, he's authority on birds in the University of North Carolina, and he said paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur, but it's not. It's a bird, a perching bird. And no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. And he's actually a evolutionist. He just doesn't believe. He sees the evidence and he interprets it the same way Dr. Menton does. So this is a video from Canada. This guy, we saw him on the DNA videos. So let me play his input.
To celebrate the Year of Darwin, in 2009, the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller, Alberta, added a new Darwin exhibit. In that exhibit, they quote Darwin lamenting the lack of intermediate fossils found in the fossil record. But just in proportion as this process of extermination of parent forms by new varieties has acted on an enormous scale, so must the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed on Earth be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? A good question indeed. So, 150 years of scientific research and study later, with the anniversary of Darwin's book, Origin of the Species, the Royal Tyrrell is proud to present to you the numerous intermediate fossils that have been discovered since Darwin's time. All 2 of them. The famous Canadian fishapod, Tiktaalik, was one, famous because it was supposed to be the predecessor of the foot, until fossil footprints were found in Poland, allegedly in older rocks than Tiktaalik. Thus, Tiktaalik was promptly hurled out of the evolutionary tree. The other example of an intermediate was Archaeopteryx, allegedly the ancestor of the birds, allegedly 150 million years old, with fully formed feathers. Now, there are some small problems with this alleged evolution of the birds, seeing as how all of the feathered dinosaurs are presented as proof that dinosaurs evolved into birds, until you point out that Archaeopteryx predates them all with fully formed feathers. It's at this point that the dino to bird theorists concede and claim that the feathered dinosaurs are still evidence of dinosaurs evolving into birds, but they are all evolutionary dead ends, with the fully formed feathers of Archaeopteryx de-evolving into the proto-feathers of the other feathered dinosaurs. Confused yet? You should be. But don't look at me, I'm just reporting.
So what he's saying there in that short clip is that when you date, when the scientists, the evolutionary scientists date Archaeopteryx, keep saying Archaeopter, when they keep dating Archaeopteryx, it's before the dinosaurs that it's supposed to have evolved from. So it's before what they say was the source of the evolution. And it's like saying, you know, it's cause and effect. It's like, well, you could say, well, I see the ground and it's wet, so that causes the rain. It's the other way around. When it rains, it causes the ground to be wet. So the Archaeopteryx predates the dinosaur that it was supposed to evolve from, but then the evolutionists say, well, that faded away and the offspring of the Archaeopteryx went back into being dinosaurs with proto-feathers, and then they re-evolved again as birds. Problem number 2 is they keep digging up these dead animals, these Archaeopteryx, and what they found soft tissue. Just like in dinosaurs, as they've continued to dig, they find more and more soft tissue in all of the dinosaur samples that they're digging up. And they just announced in the National Academy of Sciences a report by people that say they've found tissue, soft tissue from parts of the feather and parts of the connecting tissue to the bird into the feather, and they say it's amazing that the chemistry is preserved after 150 million years. But chemistry itself, and you can study, I've studied this a couple of papers, that actually soft tissue chemistry shows that you can't have any remains of the soft tissue after 50,000 years. So at the bottom, it says there's soft tissue chemistry preserved in places that people didn't expect it. and that guy also is an evolutionist. So they're finding soft tissue in all of these supposed creatures that are between 65 million and 150 million years old, and all of the textbooks of conventional science say that material will decompose in 50,000 years. So that's another problem. So those are two problems that they never talk about. And then what about the Archaeopteryx had what looks like teeth? Some of the geese and penguins, actually, you can go on the internet and just type bird teeth, and it comes up with a bunch of pictures. The white and the black and white geese, if you look at their mouths, you can see little ridges of teeth in there. So there are birds, even today, that have survived, haven't gone extinct, that have teeth. And then on the other hand, lizards, there's a number of lizards that don't have teeth that we know today. So not all reptiles. The crocodiles uniformly have teeth in that group of animals, but some of the small reptiles, they don't have teeth, and even some of the mammals don't have teeth, and so we won't have a show of hands where mammals don't have teeth. But we'll continue on. And here's a European, I think down here, this bottom picture shows very clearly the serrated teeth on the edge of the beak. So I just wanted to show this slide. We show the DNA complexity. The first life, as the evolutionists claim, is down here. It just happens that God made some bacteria, so they have a very simple DNA. The birds are here. They're about 1 billion. Actually, they have less DNA than the dinosaurs they're supposed to have evolved from. So that's another, so if you're sort of tracking between complexity, you would think that as evolution goes on, you get more and more complexity. That's what they tell you in the tree of life. But it's actually the dinosaurs have more complexity than the birds. And we can't forget the flowering plants. Roses have 30 times more DNA complexity than human beings. So we have to give our respect to the plants. So here's a list of some of the things. I wanted to go over the differences. So we hear all about what the similarities are. So dinosaurs and reptiles today, they can't fly. Birds can fly with some exceptions, like the penguin and the ostrich. The dinosaurs are cold-blooded. The birds are warm-blooded. The dinosaurs, most likely as reptiles, they had a slow metabolism. The birds have a very fast metabolism so that they can generate the energy to fly. The reptiles today have 3 heart chambers, and the birds have 4, so there's an additional heart chamber. The reptiles have skin or scales, and the birds have feathers. Reptiles have legs, and the birds have wings, and most importantly, they have wings with very strong muscles attached to them in order to create the amount of force in order to move the air to get them up in the sky. The reptiles have a stomach, whereas the birds have what's called a chop. It's a pouch where food is stored and partially decomposed, and then it goes into a gizzard. Goes to the stomach, and then it goes into a gizzard where there's additional digestion, and they find rocks in there. So the gizzard is grinding up the food and helping the nourishment go into the animal. Reptiles, they have their young abandon the eggs, like turtles. Sea turtles, they bury the eggs in the sand and then they swim off, never to come back. And then the birds, we know they build nests, they care for their young. So the activities and the breathing diaphragm is very different. The reptiles have lungs like we do, where we respirate by breathing in and breathing out, where the birds have kind of a flow-through breathing system, and I'll show you a couple of pictures of that. I'll skip over that. So this is the flight, the genius of birds.
Perhaps no living thing has captured man's imagination more than birds. Birds were specially created on day 5, before God made dinosaurs and other land animals. Their complex design works together in perfect harmony to make flight possible. Consider the common seagull. First, it's designed to be light. Its bones are hollow, but strengthened by braces. Engineers have adopted this same design in airplane wings and steel girders because it's ideal for minimum weight and maximum strength. In addition to being lightweight, birds are well balanced, with their weight centered under their wings. Powerful breast muscles pull the wings downward, while an ingenious pulley system pulls the wings upward. Another design is the bird's wishbone. Formed by the fusion of the collarbones, the wishbone is both sturdy and flexible, so it keeps the force of the wing muscles from crushing the bird's chest. Birds also have a high-performance breathing system, unique in the animal world. Rather than constantly lifting and lowering a diaphragm and ribs, their muscles pump air directly into air sacs and hollow bones. At the same time, the strong but light rib cage is held rigid by a clever combination of fused bones and struts. A critical design in birds is a broad surface area for lift. The bird's wings and feathers accomplish this beautifully. The central veins of feathers are hollow for lightness and crisscrossed with barbs and barbules for maximum strength. And at the base of the feathers, individually controlled muscles move and rotate each feather, changing the shape of the wing to maximize lift. Feathers in the tail and wings also control navigation. Every feature of birds, from the muscles in the chest to the feathers on the wings, is well designed for flight.
So let me play another one. I love these two videos.
Birds are among the most captivating creatures on Earth. We marvel at their spectacular colors, their streamlined shapes, and their ability to fly with grace and ease. For centuries, man attempted to imitate the flight of a bird. It was only in the 20th century that he succeeded in controlled flight. To this day, in order to improve the aerodynamics of the plane, man will return to study God's marvelous avian design. Consider some of the Creator's design features. A bird's bones are lightweight and virtually hollow. They're supported inside by struts and honeycombed with air sacs. These lightweight bones are designed so efficiently for flight that the bird's feathers usually weigh more than its entire skeleton. Even its beak is designed to save weight, made of lightweight horn rather than heavy bone. Birds also have two strong sets of breast muscles, a large set to control the wing's downstrokes, and a smaller set to control the upstrokes. And only birds have been created with feathers. Feathers insulate the bird from the sun's heat, protect it from the cold, waterproof the body, and create wing and tail surfaces necessary for flight. Each feather is connected to a nerve and controlled by a muscle. This precision muscular control helps the bird balance in the air, steer, and brake when slowing down to land.
Birds, they're just truly spectacularly amazing. They're well known, of course, for the feather, which is a masterpiece of strength and lightness combined in one thing. They have a little system of barbs, barbules, kind of like hooks and eyelets and Velcro. that can zipper together the little feathers that stick out from the main shaft. And they can take their bill and zipper them and unzipper them as they oil their feathers. And each feather along the length of the wing has a slightly different size and shape that's coordinated with all of the others. There's no way at all feathers could just arise by time and chance. They are marvels, masterpieces, miraculous examples of creation.
Another essential element to bird flight is the air-filled bags that lie between the bird's organs. The bird's air sacs are connected to its lungs, and during flight, air flows through them. This arrangement rapidly feeds the bird's body tissues with life-supporting oxygen, while keeping it light in the air.
All birds are amazing. You know, they have a system of breathing that's not found in any other creature. The bird lung is a special double tide system where you can oxygenate air both inhaling and exhaling. Unlike our lungs or the lungs of any other creature, the bird lung has back doors. And it turns out that this is important. Birds do not change the shape of their chest cavity when they breathe. You know, if you saw a bird just land from a 1,000-mile migration, just landed, would you see the chest heave as he breathed? They are stone still, no matter how hard they've been flying. You think, how do they breathe? Turns out that the air is moved through the bird much like a bellows for a fire. These air bags between the muscles. As the bird flies, as it walks, it's moving the air. Such wonderful creatures God made in birds.
All of these engineering marvels combine for efficient flight and show perfect foresight in the creation of birds.
So I think that's amazing. I'm going to jump through some slides because I'm kind of behind. I just went over in the slides what was in the movie, and if you have any questions, we can take that at the end. One of the things, though, that is important is the birds have giant muscles. This is a picture of the bird muscle system, and you can imagine the amount of force that you have to generate, even although the birds are tremendously light. If you've picked up a bird in your hand, it almost weighs nothing. But they have the muscles, this muscle that does the movement of the wing down is about 30% of the total weight of the bird. So 30% of the weight of the bird is devoted to that muscle. And then obviously there's another muscle on the other side that's on like a pulley that raises the wing, and you don't need near as much force because you're not pushing the air down, you're just returning the wing to a position like a swimmer puts his arms out of the water and then moves the water back, and then he goes through the pool that way. And no other animal has this characteristic, this ingenious set of muscles and the way the wings are moved up and down. To say a reptile that has legs could develop this kind of motion and those kind of muscles, it would take a number of changes to their DNA that would be impossible to occur and not kill the animal in the trying to evolve. If you tried to evolve that, you'd be dead. And you know, it's sort of patently obvious when you look at the difference between this is a reptile scale and this is a bird's feather. There's no uniformity between either one. There's no clear way that you could see how this could change into that. It just is so different. And in fact, the bird, like we have follicles for our hair, the bird has a follicle, meaning it has a little hole where the feather is attached. So the scale and the feather with the follicles, there's no follicles on a reptile. When a reptile sheds its skin, it can shed its skin, and you see a snake crawling out of its skin, and it's got skin underneath the skin. It doesn't have anything, it doesn't have even hair. So to say that the reptile has a skin that's conducive to forming feathers, we have a better chance of forming feathers because we have hair follicles that could turn into feathers, where the reptiles, they only have sheets of skin. So that's completely outrageous in their claims. So I'll skip through the bobules and the wing designs, everything that's This is a picture of the hollow bones. I'm trying to get to something at the end of the talk that I'd like to show. But these are the hollow bones. And actually, when the animal is breathing, the bird is breathing, they have the air sacs, but some of the air sacs are attached to these hollow bones. So they prize being able to store air and then inhale and exhale that air to get that oxygenated blood into their system because they're working so hard. They need to nourish all of those muscles and all of the muscles that are pulling and shaping the wings and giving the animal strength to fly. They use all of these unique features that no other animal has to accomplish that. I'll just skip through that. So the bird lungs, they have, as I said, air sacs, as Dr. Menton said on that video. The sites are not where we have gas exchange, but it is a picture at the bottom shows it's kind of a bellows system where the air flows in and out of the system where the lung is, and the blood is flowing the other way. So it's a very, very efficient, it's many times more efficient in oxygenating the blood, and then having a heart with 4 chambers rather than 3 with partial chambers. That means that you're separating the blood that has no oxygen and the blood that's just been oxygenated completely, so there's no intermixing of the blood, and you get the most efficient transfer of oxygen to the cells that are making up the bird. This is a picture of the bird digestive system. It has an esophagus where the food comes down. It has this crop where the food is stored and softened. You know, birds eat things like seeds that are very hard. And so that softens the food. It goes through the stomach and then goes into the gizzard. And the birds often swallow rocks, and that acts as kind of a grinding mechanism to grind up the seed so it can be digested by the bird's digestive system, and then you have the intestine and where the food comes out. So it's a totally different mechanism than you see. The lungs are different than reptiles. The heart is different than reptiles. The feathers are different than the reptile skin. You know, the eyesight of the bird is amazing because they have to be able to see long distances, miles, to sometimes catch their prey. It's a totally different design, and to say there's a connection is really not easy to understand based on what we see as human beings on a day-to-day basis. You know, they have the idea of some similarities in bone structure, but the rest of the animal has so many different changes. I listed in that list I put up there. Those are the vast differences, and there'd have to be significant changes in the DNA structure to accomplish even one of those facets, let alone the 8 or 10, and there's probably 100 more that when you look at it in detail, the bird is so different than a reptile. It just is beyond my imagination to see how they can be a derivative of an ancient reptile. One of the things that bird behavior, I wanted to hurry so I could get into some of these bird behaviors, is the ability to swarm and flock. And so I've got a couple of pictures there. There's a swarm of birds, kind of looks like a bunch of billowing pillows or something. And here's a number of birds. And I've got a video from England that was really interesting to me.
I've been a wildlife photographer for probably 30 years now, and I've filmed animal behavior all over the world. But there is really nothing I've seen to match what happens here on Otmore, which is about 3 miles from my own back door. It just knocks you sideways. It is almost inexplicable, and tonight should be perfect.
Late in the afternoon, small groups of starlings begin their journey back to the reeds and marshes that sheltered them the night before.
Starlings are long-distance daily commuters. They'll travel up to 30 miles to get to their chosen roost. And they follow invisible aerial corridors, snaking through the countryside, avoiding the turbulence which is going to slow them down. They all come together to stay warm and safe in a large group.
As daylight wanes, small clusters become enormous flocks called murmurations, a name possibly derived from the sound made by 500,000 beating wings.
And you'll see them gathering in the air, up to 300,000 individuals, all in one flock. They're very intelligent birds, and they'll be checking out the roost site, making sure there's no predators around. Any raptors or foxes will be thoroughly specced out before they settle.
After completing their initial survey of the heath, the flocks gather for the final time, and like a massive organism, they flow gracefully through the twilight sky. If a hawk or falcon approaches, it is often confused and driven off by the sheer mass and movements of the flock.
And when you look through the lens, you just can't believe that they won't crash into each other. And then they twist and turn, come really close. The sky almost goes black with the density of the flock. Then you can hear this roaring noise in the air, and then suddenly they'll rain down like giant black hailstones. It is an astonishing thing to see as they take to the roost for the night. So, who decides whether to turn left or right? Or to form a giant sphere, or a jumping line in the sky? Who sends a message that it's time to dive back into the reeds for the night? And how is it transmitted to 100,000 birds in an instant? Maybe we'll never have all the answers, and that's all right with me, because every time I come here on a winter evening, I still get the chills, and I'll still be amazed, and I'll walk home thinking, how wonderful is that?
Pretty amazing. So I wanted to use that as sort of an introduction to some of the amazing features for the last half hour of the talk of some of the birds that I'm showing here, the Arctic tern, the toucan, the plover, and the woodpecker. We'll start with the Arctic tern. It's an amazing bird. It knows how to travel enormous distances. It flies round trip from near the North Pole to the South Pole. 22,000 miles every year, the Arctic tern. And they breed in almost constant sunshine of the Arctic summer and in areas such as Greenland and Iceland. Then they fly south with the sun to land and feed not far from the South Pole. And it's amazing. And the birds, they can fly, they've tagged birds, and then had birds captured, and they found a bird in 1982 that had flown 11,000 miles. And if you calculated how fast they were flying, they were covering over 100 miles a day, the little Arctic terns. And the migration is a mystery to the people who have the theory of evolution. There's no explanation of how the birds know where to go and when they decide from the time standpoint. And there's instincts that are in there that are built into the bird. There's no two ways around it. Just like the instincts of those starlings we saw in the last video, they never crashed into each other, and they surveyed where they wanted to spend the night, and then they all landed. So Arctic terns don't need to be told where to go. Their creator built that information into their design when he created them. The toucan, I had the toucan, which has a very interesting shape of its bill. It's a massive bill for the size of the bird. And God created it with unique features. The toucan uses its beak for defense, for eating food, for courtship, for conserving energy, and regulating body temperature. They can become cooler by radiating temperature from their beaks. And they've studied this with infrared photography, so they can tell when the bird is doing that. And you might think with this colorful bill that might draw attention to the toucan when it's nesting, but it's quite the contrary. In the brilliant foliage of the rainforest, the way the light plays with the leaves and the blowing leaves and all of the scattered light that comes down from the trees, the bird actually is camouflaged by the colorful bill, and it hides from the prey like hawks and jaguars and snakes and man. By being so colorful, it just blends in. And so it's an amazing animal, and in fact, as we humans have caught on to the design capability that God builds into his creatures, we've actually copied the toucan bill, and they're using that as a design to create safer cars, lighter aircraft, and better football helmets to reduce concussion. So it's actually using God's design. We're reverse engineering God's design in order to make products that we need. Then the golden plover is another amazing animal. It summers in Alaska and winters in Hawaii. It has its eggs, and as soon as the little chicks are ready to fly, the mother and father, take off for Hawaii. They abandon their children. So there's no teaching. The eggs that just hatched, they don't have any instructions on where to go. And then as they fly around, they gather food, they build up the fat that they need to store the energy to fly, and then they take off for Hawaii. And the plover can't swim. If it falls into the ocean, it can't swim, so it's going to die. And the bird actually flies 2,500 miles nonstop. There's no stopping points that they found for the bird between Alaska and Hawaii. And the body, they've done measurements on the birds when the birds leave Alaska and when the birds arrive in Hawaii, or vice versa when they fly back from Hawaii to Alaska. And they found out that the starting weight of the bird is about 200 grams. And when the birds arrive in Hawaii, they're about 130. And they've done tests, and if the bird is much below 130 grams, then it can't fly. And the bird takes 72 hours. The bird burns about a gram of fat every hour. They've tested it to see how much body weight it loses. And it only has enough fat energy to 70 grams. It can fly for around 70 to 72 hours. before it would lose all of its ability to fly. But how do they make it? They know that it's an 88-hour flight at the flight of the birds. How do they make it? And the solution to that is they fly in a V formation like the Canadian geese. And it's just like if you watch a NASCAR race, the cars form kind of a V on the track in order to what they call do drafting. So the first car breaks the air and makes kind of a aerodynamic flow of air passing over it. And then the other cars get right in behind, real close. So the air, the turbulence passes over them and they get pulled along. So that's called drafting. With the birds, the same thing. The first bird breaks the air, and then all of the other birds in the V formation benefit by that. It makes it easier to fly, so they can fly farther on a gram of body fat. And then they take turns. So the first bird is working hard. He's breaking the air, but the other ones replace him as time goes on. And they can fly for over 100 hours in that V formation. So God has given them the instinct to fly in the V formation. And there's actually, this is a graph of papers that have been written on that. And the other thing is the plover is no bird brain. It actually can navigate to its location. They have tagged plovers, and the bird comes back to the exact location in Hawaii and lands, they said, within the distance of 20 meters. So the bird that leaves comes back to the same place in Hawaii every year, and that bird is accurate, as accurate as the navigation on a jet plane, and you see all the computers sitting there. Let me play the plover video.
The Pacific golden plover is a shorebird which lives in the great Arctic North. Weighing only half a pound, it lays about 4 eggs that hatch in 24 days. After having its chicks, this bird embarks on a courageous and Herculean migration.
How does evolution explain how a migratory animal gets from where he is in the summer to where he is in the winter? Usually the explanation is you have this certain kind of bird, and he grows in Texas. And then one winter, Texas is a cold winter. So he decides, you know something, I'm heading for Mexico. So he flies a few hundred miles south, and it's a little nicer down here. And then he comes back to Texas in the summer, but it's a especially hot summer. So he decides, you know, I think I'm going to go to Kansas. So he flies north, looking for a little cooler weather. And then each year he might go a little further south, a little further north, until they get all the way up to the Arctic and all the way down in South America. Well, this little bird breaks that rule. First of all, it's a very small bird, about the size of a dove, and it's not a swimmer, and it lives up in the Arctic, in Alaska actually. They leave their young and then fly to Hawaii for the winter. Now, when it leaves Alaska, it has an 88-hour flight nonstop because there's no land in between. 3 days and 4 nights nonstop. How does it do that? Well, these little birds begin to eat a lot, and they gain about 70 grams of burnable energy. And here's the problem. We got an 88-hour flight, and they burn right at 1 gram per hour. Well, that only gives them 70 hours worth of fuel. So they're going to drop into the ocean as non-swimmers a few hours short of Hawaii. Well, then how do they get there? Well, because God made them so they fly in formation, and they alternate leaders, and so they break the airwaves there, so it makes it easier, like geese fly in formation. And that cuts the energy that it takes to fly.
It's not uncommon for birds of that size to lose 50% of their total body weight, and that's fat being burned up along their migration routes. It's an incredible feat. If you can imagine a 100-pound human losing 50 pounds in a 5-day period as they traveled across the world. It's just something that mammals can't do.
And so, only God could do that because the evolutionary explanation doesn't fit, because there's no way they could go a little bit each year, a little bit further south, plop, there, fish bait. Okay, so they can't do it. So the evolutionary explanation doesn't work on them. There is another interesting thing, and that is the parents have their eggs, the babies hatch, but then the parents fly to Hawaii. Now the young are here, and they're going to keep eating and growing and gaining strength to get their 70 grams of fat built up, and then they take off for Hawaii, but they've never been there before. So how do they navigate? How do they know where to go? Nobody knows for sure. And if they miss it, even if some side wind would catch them and start blowing them off course, they still get there.
And they can arrive at the exact same location every year within an area the size of this room. And they do this over thousands of miles.
How do these animals get from here to there? The scientists are still trying to figure that out. Same thing with the homing pigeons. These little birds can find their way back home to their very spot where they need to go from almost anywhere in the world. Now, there are these huge areas that they've never flown over before.
So they use many means, and we don't even really know what they all are and how they do it. But when we take them out and release them, they'll circle for a while and get oriented and head for home. It's amazing.
What is guiding them across these areas, and what is built into them that God has done? I think that's the only way to describe this. God has made these little creatures so they can find their way over totally unknown territory to them.
Exploration films, where curious truths and uncommon minds meet.
So that's the plover. Another one that's really interesting is what's called the malleefowl. It's in an Australian bird. And what happens is the male and the female mate, and the female lays the eggs into a nest, and then she leaves. And so the father, the male, has to raise the baby, and he has to keep the eggs warm. So what he does is he scratches the dirt and the sand on top of it, and below the eggs are a rotting compost heap, and that generates heat. So the bird watches over that nest, and he actually has to keep the eggs at a certain temperature. The eggs have to be kept at a 91 degree Fahrenheit, plus or minus 2 degrees, or the eggs won't hatch. And so the bird has built into its beak some sort of a sensing device that tells it what temperature that heap is at. So he knows that he's incubating the eggs at exactly the right temperature, and then when the eggs are incubated, 60 to 90 days later, the chicks come out, and the birds go on their way. And nobody teaches them how to do this. They just have that built in. The instinct is in the animal, given by God, to how they are supposed to take care of their nest. And here's another unique bird. It's called the Egyptian vulture, and it actually uses tools. And they have ostrich eggs that they like to feast on, but their beaks are insufficiently strong to break the eggs. So what do? They pick up a rock, and they go over and they pound the rock on the egg until the shell cracks, and then they feast on the yolk of the egg, the ostrich egg. And they've put other vultures that are not this Egyptian vulture in with the Egyptian vulture. They let the other vulture watch the Egyptian vulture bang on the egg, and then they both go over and eat the egg, and then they take the vulture that they're trying to teach into another pen and give it a rock, give it some rocks, give it an egg, and it can't figure out how to do it. So this bird has been programmed uniquely, along with a few other birds that have actually learned how to use tools, or not learned how. They were created by God with the knowledge how to use those tools. And it's just amazing. This is a picture of a plover in Egypt. These plovers are also scavengers that clean the teeth of the crocodile. And how does that evolve? You know, if you have a crocodile, he's don't open his mouth the first time you walk in there, he's don't close his mouth, and you're his lunch. So this bird and the crocodile cooperates because he gets his teeth cleaned and the bird gets the food. The hummingbird is obviously unique. It can fly backwards, it can fly forwards. Let's run a little hummingbird here.
The hummingbird's tongue is about twice as long as its beak, so it can reach deep into a flower. And until recently, many scientists believed that the birds relied heavily on capillary action to draw the nectar through their tongues and into their mouths. Kind of like water spontaneously rising up a thin straw in a glass. But some fascinating discoveries at the University of Connecticut have shown that the mechanisms involved are much more dynamic than anyone realized. The hummingbird's tongue is actually a nectar trap, equipped with a pair of narrow tubes that taper sharply. The tip of each tube is segmented into a row of flaps that are attached to a supporting rod. When the bird isn't eating, these flaps form two rows of closed loops that fit compactly into the beak. But when the hummingbird feeds, its tongue undergoes a dramatic transformation. Inside the flower, the tongue extends to make contact with the nectar. When immersed in fluid, the tip splits, and the flaps on each fork systematically unfurl. Then, as the tongue is withdrawn, the flaps close tightly to seal and capture the nectar for delivery into the bird's mouth. This entire process is executed automatically in less than a 20th of a second, thousands of times a day. From flower to flower to flower to flower, this brilliant iridescent body, there's a kind of jewel-like quality that they have. This exquisite workmanship, the colors and the sound that they make. I think in some respects, the wonder of a hummingbird almost transcends language. And we respond to what we see at a level really, you could say, deeper than rationality. I mean, it's not irrational, but it's almost like responding to the work of an artist. And at that level, we respond with our soul, with our emotions. What can you say? Words can't do it justice, so you just stand there and applaud.
So I'll do with the woodpecker, and then I need to stop because I'm coming up on time. The woodpecker is an amazing animal. It has a very long tongue, as you can see here. The tongue actually wraps around its whole brain, and is actually the end of it is right in front of the eye. So it has a tremendously long tongue, many times longer than the beak. The beak is made out of strong material but flexible, so as the woodpecker pounds his head against the wood with the beak to try to break the wood open to get the grubs and other insects that live underneath, its brain isn't damaged. It actually is cushioned by an elastic layer that supports the brain in a thin fluid-filled space and spongy bone. So all of those factors cause the woodpecker to be able to hit the wood with a force that would actually kill either mammals, or also they can do damage to the brain. You know, we hear about concussions now in football all the time, and they're actually studying this combination of, again, of behavior and the build of the details of the bird in order to try to make better football helmets. So again, they're working with forces that are unbelievable, and they say actually the bird, when it's pecking its beak at about 22 times a second, it's actually closing its eyes, its eyelids, when the beak strikes in order that the eyeball doesn't fly out. So that's how hard it's hitting.
The woodpecker is a very special little bird. The beak of a woodpecker is like industrial strength. It is stronger than other birds' beaks. He has special feet. Most birds have 3 toes out the front, 1 toe out the back. Woodpecker has 2 toes out the front, 2 toes out the back, and that's so he can climb around on a tree trunk, a vertical tree trunk, right side up, upside down, sideways. He can crawl any way he wants to. He has special tail feathers. His tail feathers are different than other birds' tail feathers. They're more resilient, they're spongy, and they're very strong and tough because he tripods himself with his 2 feet and his tail feathers so that he grabs a hold of that tree, fans out his tail feathers, and then bangs his head into the tree. Now, you would think that a woodpecker would go home every night and say to Mrs. Woodpecker, "Oh, I got this headache. I was banging my head on a tree all day." But he doesn't. Why? Well, because God made him with special equipment. For instance, between his beak and his skull, there's a piece of cartilage. It acts as a shock absorber. His skull is the thickest bone per body weight of any creature. As a matter of fact, brain surgeons study the brains of woodpeckers, how they're hooked in there and everything, to help them with like trauma people in accidents, that they need to put their brains back in there. And so they study woodpeckers. The woodpecker, with his strong skull and his shock absorber and his strong beak and his tail feathers and his feet, he's all ready to go except for one thing. Once he drills his hole, he's got to get that bug out of the tree because that's lunch. All right, well, how's he going to do that? Well, most birds, their tongue goes right to the tip of the beak. A woodpecker's tongue goes as much as 10 inches out of his beak. Now, why? Well, because he's going to drill the hole, find the bug tunnel down in the tree, stick his tongue down in the tunnel, and drag the bug out. Now, you would have to say, could I stick my tongue down a hole in a tree and drag a bug out? Of course not. Well, how does the woodpecker do that? Well, God made the woodpecker with little barbs on the tip of his tongue, and he will literally stab that bug larva down in there because it doesn't want to come out. But in case that's not enough, he has a little glue factory in his tongue that manufactures precisely the right glue to stick to the bug, but it doesn't stick to his beak. And so he pulls that bug into his mouth. Now we have a problem. If evolution is true, let's say over hundreds of thousands of years, this woodpecker got all this equipment, and then he glues his tongue to a bug and he swallows the bug. What just happened to his tongue? He just swallowed his tongue. You know, he dies, he just strangled himself, okay? But he doesn't. Why? Well, because as he brings the bug into his mouth, he has another little factory that manufactures the solvent to dissolve the glue. So he dissolves the glue, loosens up the bug, swallows the bug. God made him that way. Woodpeckers, when they peck, they open their eyes between each peck, and they aim their beak, they focus, they aim their beak, they close their eyes, and then they hit the tree. So you hear a woodpecker out there, he's going, drrr, drrr. Every time you hear that, drrr, in between each peck, he opens his eyes, focuses, aims his beak, hits the tree. Why? Well, they used to think it was just to keep the wood chips out. But now the scientists have measured the force of the impact of the woodpecker's head against the tree, and the force is so great that if he did not close his eyes, he would pop his eyeballs out. So I would say, have you ever seen a blind woodpecker? No, they never miss. They never miss, okay? Now, one special woodpecker, the European green woodpecker. I think he's unique in all the animal kingdom. I don't know for sure, but I think he might be. His tongue is different than any other tongue, as far as I know. Our tongue starts in the back of our throat, comes up and out the front. His tongue starts in the back of his throat, goes down the throat, comes out the back of his neck, up over the top of his head. It's under the skin. Comes out a little hole between his eyes, goes in one of his nostrils, and then comes out of his beak. And you would have to say, now how does that evolve? I've asked evolutionists that question. I've said, now you tell me, how and where did that tongue come from? They don't have a clue. They can't tell me. I'm saying, well, you're telling me that this bird evolved from some other creature, but there's no other creature that we know of with a tongue like that. How did that happen? They don't have any idea. I think there are very bright people who study science and do a good job of it. But all of a sudden they get to a point where they have to decide, did this thing happen over long periods of time somehow? Or, boy, it sure looks like it could have happened just bang, just like it is. And then if they discover, hey, I have no way of describing this thing in terms of evolutionary science, they're faced with the other option, which is maybe a designer and a creator, and they say, I don't want to go that way, okay? So they suppress that evidence. And so many of the things that I studied, we had to search just to find information on them because they are not in the textbooks. They just don't put them in because they have no way to explain it. And so they just ignore it.
I just wanted to put a picture, you know, I'm mesmerized by the birds, the color, the design. You know, it's as that last video said, it's like an artist. And we see God is a God of beauty and design. He's an artist of amazing, beyond anything of human capability. And so he deserves all our honor. He deserves all the glory. And he's the one that created all of us, especially the birds, not from dinosaurs. So this myth is officially busted, is my conclusion. So I thank you for your time and patience, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.